Okay, in this third part of the tutorial we're going to look at creating a basic camera rig. The rig that we're going to create is relatively simple, but it will enable you to create some more dynamic camera moves with a lot of ease. So first of all we need to add in a camera, and what we're going to do is we're going to take the camera and we're going to nest it into a group of nulls, and then we can assign controls to the nulls using Espresso and user data. That may sound a bit daunting, but don't worry, it's all good stuff, and you should be able to follow along quite easily. To give you an example of how this may work, let's just add a cube into the scene first of all, and let's add a null object. If we take the camera and make it a child of the null, we can then grab our null object, press R for rotate, and we can then drag around. If we just click on this little icon so we're actually working with the active camera, we can see the result. So by doing this we can orbit around objects with ease. If we had another null object, we could then adjust things like pitch. So basically this is what we're going to do. So if we just take the null, just delete this and the cube, select our camera, let's come to the coordinates, and first of all I'm just going to zero these out. Also zero out the rotation coordinates. If we uncheck that so we can see what we're doing and we can see our camera in place. With the camera selected, press the Alt key and let's add in a null. Let's hold the Alt key down and add another null, and let's add one more. Now you could add 4 depending on the kind of setup. For here we're just going to control heading and pitch. We could add one for bank. The next thing I'm going to do is just rename these. So I'm just going to call this cam controls, press the down arrow key, call this cam heading, the down arrow key cam pitch. Okay, so we have our camera at the bottom of all these null objects. If we select the cam controls, we can rotate this around, and because the camera is a child, you can see that the rotation travels down the hierarchy and rotates all the objects lower down. The way that I'm going to control the camera is through the use of user data and Espresso, and what we will do is add in some user data controls and then link those to certain parameters. It's a bit like in After Effects where you have expression controls and you can use those to link to parameters on other layers. So with the cam controls null objects selected, come down to the attribute manager and you can see here we have a user data menu item. So if we click here we can choose add user data. Now this dialog has changed from revision 10 to revision 11, but it is very similar. Basically what we need to do first of all is to add some data types, and we're going to use a float for this, and the interface we're going to choose float slider, and the unit is degree. Okay, so we can set the amount that the slider steps as we drag it, and we probably want to set that for around 0.1. If we set it at 1 degree, that may not be high enough. For the minimum and maximum, let's say minus 360 to plus 360. And let's click OK. And as you can see down here, we have an item called data. I should have named that. But we can now see that we can go from minus 360 to plus 360. If we come into our manage user data, again this is different in revision 10, but you should see your item data. You can then actually rename this. So let's call this camera heading. Okay, so now we've renamed that camera heading. That kind of makes a little bit more sense. So I'm just going to come in and add a few more. So I'm going to choose camera pitch. Again, we want the data type to be float, interface float slider, unit degree, step 0.1, minimum minus 360, maximum 360. Okay, now we have two sliders. At the moment, as you can see, as we drag them around, they aren't having any effect on our scene. That's because they just exist there as a data type, but they're not actually applying that data to any other parameter. The last item I'm going to add in, I'm going to call the camera Z depth. As I said, it is a relatively simple rig. We could add some more elements in here, such as camera bank, camera field of view, etc, etc, depth controls. You can make these as simple or as complicated as you like, and hopefully after this example you'll have the inclination to go and build your own. So for the data type I'm going to put float, interface float slider, unit real, step 1, minimum minus 6000, maximum 0. Let's press OK, and here we have our camera Z depth. Minus 6000 may not be enough, but we can always come in and manage the user data later and adjust that. So now we have our 3 user data sliders set up. The next thing to do is to attach these pieces of information so that they're linked to a parameter. First of all, on the cam controller, let's choose tags, Cinema 4D tags, Espresso tag. You can just see that in the corner of the capture area there. In this Espresso window, I'm going to drag my cam controller. Let's just pull down the node and let's click in the red for the output ports. And on the output ports, you can see at the bottom here we have our user data. So I'm going to add camera heading, camera pitch, and camera Z depth. And what happens here is the value that is in our user data down here will be output from these ports, and we can then use that and link that into the input of another object. So if we take our cam heading null, come here, choose coordinates, rotation, rotation H, we can then link our camera heading into the rotation H of the camera heading null. So as we adjust our cam controller heading user data, that value will travel through and it will appear in the heading of our cam heading null. And next I'm going to drag in the camera pitch. This time coordinates rotation, rotation P. Link the camera pitch to this input. Finally drag the camera in and this time choose coordinates position, position Z. And if we link the camera Z depth to the position Z, we can then control our Z position of our camera. So that's it. This rig should now be set up. If we come to our cam controller, let's just try it out. First of all, let's adjust the Z depth. As we drag it back, you can see the camera moves back. If we adjust the heading, you can see the camera moves around. If we adjust the pitch, you can see the camera's pitch is also adjusted. If we want to see this working from the camera point of view, we can just click on this icon here, so we're viewing it from the camera point of view. Let's add in a cube, for instance, and now come to our cam controller, and you can see that we can orbit around our cube. We can easily move up and down to view it from different pitch, and we can use our Z depth to move in and out. So if we just zero these parameters, let's set the camera Z depth to minus 1000. Okay, so if you wanted to frame an object, you can just pull your pitch up slightly, adjust your heading, and there we have our cube nicely framed. If you want to rotate around it and adjust the pitch as you move, it's a pretty simple procedure. So let's set our camera heading to 0, our pitch to minus 20. Let's add a key for both of these. Move to the end of the timeline. Let's adjust our heading to 180 and our pitch to minus 40. Add another key, and you can see that we've created a nice simple camera move that without using this kind of technique would have actually been pretty tricky. If you look at it from above, let's zoom out, you can see the camera rotates around, and if we look at it from the side, you can see the camera adjusts its pitch accordingly. So using this technique you can create some quite funky and some quite cool camera moves pretty easily. For now I'm just going to select these parameters, choose animation, delete track. I'm going to set the camera pitch to 0, camera depth I'm going to leave at minus 1000, and I'm just going to delete the cube and save this scene. It's probably a good idea to do that, and then you can use this as a library item and use it on scenes later. But as I said before, it'd be a good idea perhaps to build your own and to add a few more controls in. For this project, these controls should suffice. So let's just save this, take this into our main scene, and we can have a look at setting up the composition and adding some keys to add some animation to our camera. Back in the main scene, we can come to the Object Manager, choose File, Merge Objects, and we can select our camera rig, and we can choose Open, and that brings our cam controller into the scene. If we click here to switch to the active camera, come to our cam controls, we need the coordinates and the user data visible. Let's set our camera Z depth to be -600 first of all. What I intend to do here is start off pretty close into the sphere, pull back. As we pull back we can reveal the globe, and then at that point the text can orbit around the globe and become visible. So for now I'm just going to hide the text that we created because that's not actually going to be relevant at this point. Next thing is just to create a key for my camera at frame 0 for the Z depth of -600. Okay, the next thing is to move forward in time. And what I want to do here is just move to, say, frame 20. So we can just type that in here. And at this point, I just want to pull the camera out so that we can see our globe. So somewhere like that. So I've put in -1500. Let's add a key. So if we now scrub, we can see that we've added our first piece of animation. For now we're just going to block out the animation, so I'm going to jump to frame 55, and all I want to do here is just carry on the camera pulling back so that as the first set of words spin around the globe, we keep a little bit of movement on our camera. So I've set my camera Z depth to -1600 on frame 55, and that means that between frame 20 and 55 we'll just have a really slow pull back from the camera. Okay, at this point I think that the text is going to whiz off and the next piece of text is going to whiz on. So we could complement that with a kind of fast camera move back. We don't want to move too far back because we want the text to stay relatively the same, but we could also do that towards the end as we pull back and reveal the title of the program. So the next thing to do is to move forward in time, and again we're going to just move a short number of frames. I say something around 10 frames, so let's go to frame 65, and this time we pull the camera back even more. So this time I'm going to set it to -2100. Okay, and add another key. And as before, where we had this longer period, we can leave a gap of a certain number of frames and just have the camera moving back again so that we kind of repeat a similar movement as before. So let's jump to frame 100, and this time let's set our camera Z depth to -2200 and add another key. So now if we scrub through, we pull back so we can reveal the globe. At this time the text spins round. As it spins round, this period gives us a little bit of time to read it. Then it whizzes off, we pull back again as the next piece of text appears. Again, more time to read it. And then finally, for this end of the animation, we can pull the globe back so it's small, and then we can wipe on the title. Again, we can use quite a fast camera move back just to add a little bit of dynamism. So let's set this to frame 110. And here let's set the camera depth to -6000. Okay, add a key at this point. I'm not sure exactly how far across this needs to go, but at this point we can animate the position of our camera null, so we move the actual camera controls, and if you notice, what we can do is we can just drag this to the left or right, and that will reposition our camera. And this will mean that the move is quite easy to adjust because we can adjust the Z depth or we can adjust the X parameter individually. I'm just going to reset that for a moment, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in the Illustrator artwork for the title, which is News Today, and we can just drop that into an extrude NURBS just for positioning purposes for now, and this will allow us to kind of frame our end shot. If we come to the Object Manager and choose File, Merge Objects, and I can come to my Illustrator directory, choose News Today, open this. Okay, and here we have all the paths separate. So for now I'm just going to select all of these, choose Connect. I can delete the original group. Let's call this News Today Spline. And with this selected, hold the Alt key and add in an extrude NURBS. Let's call this Extrude News Today. We can't actually see it at the moment, so if we just come into the editor and just drag this across, we can see that it's actually a little bit small at the moment. If we select the Scale tool, we can scale up the extrude, and that would also scale up the spline. So let's just scale this up until it looks about the right size. We can always come back and adjust this later. As I said, we're just going to use this for positioning for now. And I think it probably wants to be something around here. Let's just drag it across so we can see the news, and we want a small gap here. Okay, so something like that looks good. I always like to work in kind of round numbers if I can, so let's come to our object and let's just set the Z movement to 50, and also I'd like to add in a fillet around the news today as we did on the previous text. I'm going to make it slightly bigger so that we can see it because it's at a distance, but I'm not going to use a value quite as high as 19, so I'm just going to check this and put 4, and I'll put 4 for the end radius. If we just hit render now, we can see that that's working fine. So the next thing to do is to adjust the camera position so that this is framed nicely within our editor window. So if we come to the cam controller, one thing that we need to bear in mind is if we animate the position of it, then the globe is going to move. So what we need to do is at this point here from frame 100, we need to then animate the position of the cam controller, but at this point it needs to stay there. Otherwise what will happen if we move down to here and animate our X position, when we go backwards everything's moved out of place. So let's just undo that for now. Go to frame 100 and let's control click to add a key for our X position. Move to frame 110, and then here we need to just scrub this value until it looks as if it's framed in a satisfactory way. So somewhere around here. Add another key. So if we just drag through in the power slider so we can see the effect of that. Okay. So we've blocked out the animation for the camera quite quickly there. You can see that as we scrub through, there's a few issues. Specifically at this point here, we've got the camera moving backwards and forwards. So we could do with just going in and adjusting our F-curve slightly so that we get a much nicer motion. I think at this point in time as well we should have the camera continuing on its motion backwards just so that we have a living hold, so that rather than the news title being there static, there is a small amount of movement, and it will just give us a little bit more interest. I'd like the overall animation to be 7 seconds, and I'm working in PAL at 25 frames a second. We can access our render settings and come to output, and here we can specify the width and height and the resolution and the frame rate, etc. In revision 11 we have these presets. I'm using PAL D1 widescreen square pixel, and what I want to do, I don't want to adjust the frame range in here because I have it as all frames. I actually want to adjust the document, and you can access that by pressing Control or Command D, or you can access it here down on the power slider. But if I press Command D, you can see that it comes up with the frame rate and the minimum and maximum number of frames. Okay, so we've set our project settings. We can pull this out here to view the full range of our project, and we can just jump to the end now, and we can adjust the cam control user data Z depth. I'm just going to eyeball this for now, and I'm going to suggest maybe 6,500. Okay, so here we come with the problem where we set our camera user data and we didn't set it to have values any lower than -6,000, so we need to adjust that, but that's easy to do. We can come to the user data, select manage user data. As I said before, this is a slightly different window in pre-release 11, but it's just a case of selecting the appropriate user data item, and then you can adjust the minimum and maximum settings. So let's set this to -10,000, click OK, and now I can choose -6,500. And again, let's add a key. So if we scrub through, you can see we zoom back, and then although everything doesn't keep moving backwards, this is to do with the F-curves, so perhaps we should jump into the F-curves and have a look at that now. So let's just pull this up slightly, switch to our timeline. Currently the timeline, if we come to the view menu, is set to automatic mode. Let's come up to show and choose show animated. This will just show us any animated properties which will unclutter it and make it easier to work with. So let's fold this down and we can see the properties that we've set keys for. So we have our camera Z depth and our position X. We can't see the full range of the project. We could use this icon here to pan across, or we can use this icon here to zoom in and out. Alternatively, we can choose frame project settings. There we go. Now we can see everything that we've keyed so far. So first of all, let's have a look at our Camera Z keys. If we click on the word, as you can see, it selects all the keys. We can then press Control and click on the F-curve icon, and it switches to F-curve mode. As you can see here, we can see all our position or our parameter keys, and we can see the grey curve that results from that. And as you can see here, we're kind of overshooting the value, and down here it's coming underneath. So what's happening as the camera reaches this point, it then comes down, and at this point here you can see that the value is lower than this key, which is why we're getting this backwards and forwards motion. So we just need to come in and have a look at each set of these and adjust them accordingly. So let's select these by dragging over, and then we can say frame selected, and that will allow us to just view these keys. First of all, let's select the key on frame 0. And as you can see, it's flat and it's kind of easing out, so there's no need to ease out of this move. It'd be probably a good idea to come to this point as soon as possible. So let's just drag this key down first of all, so that we aim it at the next key. Okay, if we select the next key, you can see that it's actually coming down here, and it is actually below this value. Well, maybe it's not quite, but it's going back up, and what we'd really like is that to be just a sort of almost a straight line between those points. So if we just drag on these handles, and let's just shorten them, and let's select this side too, and again kind of line them up so that we get a nice straight line between these points, and then we won't have any of that backwards and forward motion. Okay, like so. If we move to the next set of keys, you can see here the kind of curve really does go up far too high. We want a sort of straight line between there, and that's mostly due to this key here. So let's just zoom out slightly and take this key and just adjust it like so. And again with this, let's just point it at the next key in line, so that now we should have a nice smooth motion backwards, rather than the backwards and forwards motion that we were having before. I'm just going to frame all, and we can then select these last two keys, choose frame selected. Okay, you can see that it's framing the actual selected keys, but we can't see all of the curve, so let's just use this icon to scale it down slightly. Select this key here, and just turn this and point it towards the end. We could leave this flat so that it kind of eases into the final move, but let's just make this slightly more linear. We can come back and adjust this later, but now we should have a reasonably smooth camera move there. So we've managed to get rid of all the backwards and forwards motion. Let's just frame project settings, come to our keys, select position X, control click on the F curve, let's frame selected, and as you can see here, we've got a slight ease in and then out of this curve, and this is for the motion of the null moving across on X. So that's probably okay. Good stuff. Let's switch back to keys, frame project, and now we've got this far, it's probably a good idea to save, so I'm just going to choose save incremental, and we can carry on with the project. Before we move on, let's just organise our scene a little bit. So let's just switch to our layer browser, and we have lights, cameras. We've added a camera, so we can select the cam controls, control drag this onto that layer. We also have the extrude news today. Let's drag this with control onto the MoGraph text layer. Cool stuff. Okay, so in the next part of the tutorial, we will be animating the text and the globe. Now we have the camera move blocked out. We can animate the text orbiting around as the camera moves back. We'll be adding in some rotation on the globe, and we'll also be looking at using animation layers to add in some secondary animation so that the kind of rotation speed, etc., corresponds with our camera motion, just to tie it all together. So I look forward to cracking on with that, and I shall see you shortly. Thanks very much.